Welcome to the Strike Zone podcast. My name is Devin Karras, and I'm here with Aman Panjabi, and we're going to be discussing what has happened in the last week or so of Major League Baseball, and even a little bit, a few levels under that in the All-Star game and Futures game. We're going to be discussing that. We're also going to get into some award predictions, some fantasy awards to give out through the first half of the season, and maybe some bold predictions about some players for the second half.
Yeah, and it's episode 2, Devin, which is fun to hear about. I mean, we're getting our show on the road now, kind of establishing. But yeah, we'll need to see what's going to happen in the second half of the season.
It'll definitely be interesting. And with that being said, let's get into it. So the Futures game in Cleveland, Ohio, this past Sunday, wasn't it? And there's a lot to talk about. A lot of young players. We know last year Pete Alonso was in the Futures game. He's clearly having a tremendous year this year. And so these guys that played on Sunday, they're going to be up soon, folks. And you got to go. You got to make sure you know these players so that when they do come up, you're the first to snag them because these are hot commodities as far as the baseball industry goes.
Especially in your dynasty leagues where you're going to have to keep these players over a period of time. And if you have a team which is quite weak right now and full of players who are veterans and players who are kind of past their prime and aren't performing to their full potential, then you can look at these young players and be like, oh, one of these could probably turn out and be an all-star one day. So yeah, it's really intriguing.
So, Aman, if there's one guy in the entire Futures game that people need to know, because he's going to be up soon and he's going to produce, maybe not up soon, but is going to produce and is going to be a perennial all-star, great player, who's the guy for you? Who's the main guy?
Well, there are a lot of great players around here, both in the hitting department and the pitching department. But one player which I think stands out in the American League is Royce Lewis of the Minnesota Twins. And why I say that is he was a highly rated prospect this year. He was, I think, the number one overall pick
in
2017. Yeah, so the Twins are already such a strong team, and for them to add a guy like Royce Lewis to their lineup, I mean, that can really be a good move for Royce and for the Minnesota Twins. And I think he'll really benefit being around good hitters like Jorge Polanco and Eddie Rosario.
Definitely. I think that Royce Lewis is going to be a star in the league, but to kind of add on to that, there's obviously one guy we see on the hitting side that is also an AL shortstop, and that's Wander Franco. He's rated as the number one prospect right now by Keith Law. He's got the entire build of a shortstop. He's big, he's strong, he's Carlos Correa-esque, and he's got power, and he's got batting average, and he's got walks, plate discipline to go with that. So I think those shortstops in the American League, they're going to start coming up, and they're going to be good, especially not even just shortstops, middle infield. You look at Nick Madrigal and Jorge Mateo in Oakland. Those are guys that are going to be coming up soon and are going to be really good in the near future.
Joe Adell as well.
Definitely.
He's going to be with the Angels pretty soon. They thought that he might be able to come up this year, but they said that only if he comes back from his setbacks because he was injured earlier in the season, and the Angels didn't want to rush him up to the big leagues. So they only were saying that they might bring him up if they're in the midst of a playoff run and he avoids setbacks.
Now, is there any pitcher you see that could be really good in the near future here?
In the Futures game, I really liked Davy Garcia and Nate Pearson. So in regards to Nate Pearson, I actually didn't know about this guy until I actually started watching the game. I was hearing the announcers saying that this guy had a really lively fastball and that if you were a fan of velocity, he's going to be a guy who you're going to want to keep an eye out for. This guy apparently touched 105 miles an hour.
105, yeah.
And he was consistently, his fastball was reaching 100 to 102 miles an hour. And it was just so fun to watch. And that could be actually a really good piece for the Toronto Blue Jays in the near future.
Yeah, definitely. I think Nate Pearson is Nolan Ryan-esque. He's got the great fastball. What he's going to have to work on is his control, obviously, with all these players. But I think another guy, like you were saying, Davy Garcia, man, was he impressive in that first inning. He led off the Futures game, first player to go out to the mound. And he's a Yankees prospect. He's their fourth-rated prospect, not even in the top 100 on MLB.com. But he really impressed me. His fastball touched, 96, 97. And the thing about him is he's not a big guy. He's 5'9", but he works quick. And watch out, this guy could be traded at the trade deadline, especially with how he played in the Futures game. And I think he threw about 9 pitches. He got 1 strikeout, and every pitch was just right on the corners. Control was amazing. His curveball just had so much movement. Kind of Lance McCullers' curveball just moved out of zone. The hitters had no chance, it seemed like, against him. And even though this guy's 5'9", he's a Fernando Romero type of the Twins, where he can, despite his size, he's going to have a lively pitch every time he throws the ball, and it's going to be moving. And that's going to be something that I think in the near future, this guy, even though he might be a starter now, I think in the future he could be a long reliever for maybe a team like he could, in that Rays system, as that opener. Man, he would be electric in that system.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about how his command was really, really good in the first inning, just coming out right out of the gate. He was like all guns blazing. But I thought the one thing which was really, really interesting and really impressive about him was how quick he worked. You talked about it. You touched up about that a little bit. Working quickly is actually a really important thing, especially in baseball, because you keep the hitters a bit on their toes, and you keep them from thinking about what you're going to throw. So, especially with the kind of pitching which he has and working quickly, it can be quite a deadly combination.
Yeah, another pitcher that we saw that both I know Amon and I liked was Justin Dunn of the Mariners, something like that.
Yeah. Yep. As soon as
yeah, he is quite a player. I mean, the makeup of this guy is incredible. He's going to be a front of the rotation guy. And speaking of curveballs like Lance McCullers, this guy has a violent curveball. I mean, it's going to be hard for hitters to hit. And that's a guy that we saw get traded a couple times. He's got some really good overall grades. Even though he's only number 67 prospect, he's been pitching really well in Double-A this year. And he's going to be a guy to watch in the near future, especially since his ETA on MLB.com is this year. So maybe later this year, definitely look out for him.
Yeah, definitely. I want to move to another guy. He's actually in the NL. His name is Sixto Sanchez, and of the Miami Marlins. And this guy, he was traded from the Phillies in that JT Realmuto trade. Was supposed to be a really, really highly touted prospect. This guy was sort of expected to kind of light up in the Futures game. You kind of heard about him. You knew what he was about. But I really, really like this guy. I mean, ranked 1 in terms of prospect, in terms of pitching. For the Marlins. He's in a really good system. I mean, the Marlins have some really good young players in that system, and they're ready to start coming up one by one. But Sixto had a fastball which was consistently 100 miles an hour, 99, 98. So yeah, he's someone who's going to be really electric in the near future.
Yeah, another thing is last year he was limited due to the injuries, but he's a guy where that fastball is going to be the big thing for him. And if he can keep that control up there, he's going to be a great player in the near future, especially when you're hitting 98 and 100 on your fastball. That's pretty good. There's got to be some more hitters we can touch on. I think I'd like to talk about a guy like Sam Huff, an outfielder for the Texas Rangers in their system, and he looked really impressive. His plate approach was really good. He was the only one that hit the home run in the All-Star game. He hit the 2-run homer and in the 7th inning, and man, his exit velocity in the Rangers system, they were saying his exit velocity is consistently on pace with Joey Gallo, also in the Rangers system. And that's a pretty good exit velocity to have when you're hitting the ball as strong, as hard, as fast as Joey Gallo, who is a star now.
One of the
in the majors.
One of the premier hitters in the league, actually.
Yeah.
He was actually a highly rated prospect, too. I mean...
Yeah, he was drafted 9th overall or something like that, top 10. So he was definitely a top prospect.
Yeah.
Now, to go to the opposite side of that spectrum, we look at a guy like Nick Madrigal in the White Sox system, who the announcers throughout the game just wouldn't stop talking about how questionable his power is, and they talked about, can you be a great player without an incredible amount of power? And the reason is because this guy's a 5'8" second baseman. Like, he's a Jose Altuve, and Altuve this year, his power's dropped off because it's just not sustainable. Even when Altuve's hitting 25 homers like he did, he hit 24 in both 16 and 17. Like, that's unheard of for a guy that small and in the middle infield. And Madrigal might hit a few homers, but he's a great overall hitter, great contact, walks, does everything except put the ball out of the yard.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about, can you be a great hitter without that attribute?
You can really. I mean, take a look at a guy like DJ LeMahieu. I mean, he's not as small as Nick Madrigal. He's actually quite tall, but he's not a guy who's going to hit 30 home runs a year. I mean, he's going to be a guy who's going to be on base a lot, and that can be really important for an offense. I mean, if you get on base, that's how you score runs. You don't just have to score runs by putting the ball out of the yard. You can score runs in a lot of different ways, and getting on base is one of the best ways because as you get on base, you're putting the pitchers under pressure, and when pressure happens, you get mistakes out of the pitchers, and then that's when you can take advantage and score runs. So I think a guy like Nick Madrigal can be really, really good for the White Sox, especially in that young and up-and-coming system.
Yeah, speaking of middle infielders, another guy we got to look at, and we talked about the shortstop, is Carter Kieboom of the Nationals. That's a guy that they talked about his approach because he was up in the majors earlier this year, and his approach was just he started. I think he hit a home run in his first at bat or something, or his first game. But but what he did when he went back to the minors was he lowered his hands on the bat, or not on the bat, in his stance. And you could see it when he got up to the Futures game. It's a much different, change from his approach in the majors. And that's something that has helped him with his plate discipline. And since he's gotten back to AAA, he's been raking. And the Nationals are going to bring him up. And if he continues that trend, Kieboom could be a guy to watch out for, especially with the defense that he plays. A lot of people, especially in fantasy, undervalue the defense. But for teams, defensive runs saved is a huge part of their game, and I guess that's just like, and catchers have a huge part of that with their defense, like Jake Rogers we saw in the game. But Kieboom is going to be a guy to watch out for, and if I were a fantasy manager who was in the position where I could pick up Kieboom, I would be on the fence of doing that right now, just because of how vital he could be to your team down the stretch.
Yeah. And going back to the idea of moving his hands a little bit down the bat, they talked about how Kieboom had a little increase in terms of bat speed.
Yeah.
And in the majors, it's all about bat speed. You need to be able to catch up to pitches and drive them the other way or to the closer part of the ballpark. But you really need to have that bat speed to be able to perform against pitchers who are consistently throwing in the mid-90s to triple digits. So, I think having a guy like Kieboom can be really good, especially with having Trey Turner as a little bit of a mentor.
So, let's do this, Aman. Let's go through the Futures game lineups and lists and pitchers. And let's say, right now in an ESPN Standard League, let's say you have 6 spots on your bench, okay? And you got a couple ILs, whatever. Who would you add right now if we go through this list for, let's say, it's a keeper league and you've got next year too? Who would be a guy or a couple guys? Would we say, let's just start going down the line. Would you add Wander Franco?
I probably would.
Probably would. Okay.
I probably would. I'd probably add him. I'd probably add
Royce? Do you add Royce Lewis?
Maybe Royce Lewis.
Okay. I think Madrigal's a little far off.
Yeah, Madrigal's a little far off. I'd definitely add Kieboom.
Kieboom, okay. What about Patchy, another guy we didn't talk about, but he was a Kristen Pache. He is a 5-tool outfielder, and you combine that with Acuna in that outfield. And the prospects Austin Riley and a Freddie Freeman veteran. That Braves lineup could be dangerous. So those are two guys we could add. Luis Robert.
Luis Robert is looking good.
He came up in AAA the other day, hit his first home run.
Yeah, he definitely can be a guy who can stick around in the big leagues and perform at a high level for the White Sox.
A guy that the announcers and the game loved was Taylor Trammell of the Reds. He is a great guy, and he's going to be up in the big leagues soon.
Having an outfield of Nick Senzel and Taylor Trammell, going to be a young outfield, an explosive outfield for the Cincinnati Reds. I think that these two players, Senzel and Trammell, for the Reds, they could probably produce at a high level and help the Reds succeed.
Yeah. Would we add Joe Adell? That's definitely a guy we'd add in the Angels, I would say. To add with,
yeah, so that's so now what do we got? We got Franco, we got Keyboom.
We wouldn't add Lewis right now, not Madrigal. Yeah, Mateo, we'd add.
Maybe Mateo, yeah. So that's
Pache. I wouldn't add Isan Diaz yet of the Marlins. Not yet. Alec Baum, he's a little far off, I would say. Trammell, that's definitely an add. Will Craig, Billy Butler comparison. I would add him, but his batting average isn't really great. He's kind of a only power guy, but still could hit 250 with 30 home runs
maybe
first year.
A bit of a stretch for an ad, but I'm not really sure about that one. I think I'd
hold off on
that one just for a little bit.
Yeah. We got Nolan Gorman. I think he's a little ways off in the Cardinal system. Anybody? Dalton Varsho, maybe, as a catching prospect. He could be coming up soon.
I think Rogers is a good catching prospect. If you're looking for a young catcher, he could be up by next year, probably.
And Rogers is a guy that whenever he comes up, he's going to play because his defense is one of the greatest we've ever scouted for prospects, and his defensive run save will be tremendous for wherever team he plays. So
Tigers.
Rogers is a guy, that is going to be more defensive value per se than offensive. He can still hit for average. He can still hit for a little power. So he's going to be a guy that's going to get you time to play.
Yeah, I think he's a good all-around player, Rogers.
Kelenic, he's still a high school outfielder. I would wait on him a little bit. Evan White of the Mariners, also, I'd wait on him. Sam Huff, we'd add him. I think he's coming up probably next year. And then Isaac Paredes. And then what about Jones here?
I don't know. I mean,
Nolan Jones.
Indians. I still think that he can kind of be held off a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know. His average is actually really high. He's been hitting in the high 280s. He actually hit 317 in 2017, 283 in 2018, 281 in 19. So yeah, I think he could definitely come up. Like, there's a possibility. They may want to work him around the lineup a little bit, but he looks like a guy who could probably hit for average and a little bit of power. So yeah.
All right, let's go to the pitching side. Let's start with the NL. Anderson. Ian Anderson of the Braves. I'd say the Braves, they talked about this a lot in the broadcast. He's a guy that the Braves are going to manage him well because they have so many young prospects in the pitching department. They're going to find a way to not overload him. And I think Ian Anderson, maybe not next year. He's 21. But maybe 2 years down the road, if the Braves are gonna put him in a right place to succeed, and he could be an ace really soon.
That rotation is really up and coming. I mean, they've got guys like Mike Soroka, Mike Fultonevich, obviously. They got Keuchel in the right before the deadline, right before the All-Star break. Yeah, I think the Braves' rotation can be really good, especially with Ian Anderson coming up. The Braves are just in such a good spot right now. Especially with that premiere of a hitting lineup, and you got guys coming up into your rotation. I mean, the Braves are in the most ideal spot right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're gonna have a fun time in the next 3 years winning the NL East. I think, even with Bryce Harper. The Phillies.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody can really catch them right now. They're so talented.
What about Mackenzie Gore,
Immediate
the
ad.
of San Diego?
In my opinion, I think it's an immediate ad.
Okay.
I really like this guy. He's a lefty pitcher. Don't really see those as often anymore. He can throw for speed. He can command his pitches really, really well. I really like how he comes and approaches the hitters. I think he's going to be a good player for the Padres.
Definitely. Dustin May of the Dodgers. I would maybe wait a little bit on him, but he's going to be called up probably next year at some point. Sixto Sanchez, I would say add him. He's going to be up soon. If not this year, definitely next year.
You know what I thought was a little weird with Sixto? I see a lot of what's his name? Boston pitcher. Pedro Martinez. I don't know why. I see a lot of Pedro Martinez and Sixto Sanchez, and I think it's because of the speed and the way he pitches. It just looks like Pedro Martinez-esque. He looks so similar to Pedro.
I think another comp for him and a guy that's a young pitcher is Touki Toussaint. Mm-hmm. He not only does he look a lot like Touki Toussaint physically, but he throws it very similar and used in the same way. They could both be great pitchers in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
Adrian Morejon, Padres. I think we can wait on him a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could probably wait on him.
Anybody else on the NL side that we need to add from the futures game?
I don't know if you want to add him, but I really like Luis Patino of the San Diego Padres. He came into the futures game in a huge sort of jam, and he if at that point the AL would have scored a run, they would have won the game. And he came in and struck out 2, I think, to end the inning. And then he finished off the extra inning with a 3-and-out. So, I really thought that he's a good player. He pitches really well under pressure. And he can be a guy who can be, really clutch for the Padres. And, you may just want to keep an eye on him. Not just necessarily add him yet. You don't really have to add him yet. Nobody really knows about him. But you might just want to watch him.
Yeah, I think the main thing that we can see as far as trends go from this futures game is that the people or the pitchers who were throwing strikes were getting outs, and because they were hitting their zones and hitting their edges. Ian Anderson threw a majority of strikes. So did Mackenzie Gore. His great control was demonstrated. Sixto